Hello and welcome to today's video where we explore one of the most important moments in African history, the amalgamation of Nigeria. You might have heard about it in school, read about it online, or even seen debates surrounding it. But do you truly know what happened, why it happened, and how it shaped the Nigeria we live in today? Stay with us, because by the end of this video you will understand the real story behind the birth of Nigeria. A tale of politics, colonial control, culture clashes, and a decision that changed lives forever. If you find this topic interesting, hit the like button and subscribe. It helps us bring you more stories that matter. Before Nigeria became one country, it was home to hundreds of ethnic groups, kingdoms, and territories. Each had its own system of governance, language, culture, and traditions. There were powerful empires like the Sokoto Caliphate in the north, the Oyo and Benin kingdoms in the west, and thriving communities in the east like the Igbo societies, These groups didn't see themselves as part of one nation. In fact, most of them had little contact with each other before the arrival of the European powers. In the late 19th century, Britain, like other European countries, was in a race to claim territories in Africa, a competition known as the Scramble for Africa. Nigeria became their target, or let me say Nigeria became a target. Between 1861 and 1906, the British took control of different regions, Lagos, northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria, and they ruled them as separate colonies. Each region had its own administrative policies, its own taxes, and its own colonial officers. But managing three regions was difficult and expensive. The British wanted a more efficient way to rule. That's where the idea of amalgamation came in. The person most connected to the amalgamation of Nigeria is Lord Frederick Lugard, a British colonial officer with strong ideas about how to rule Africa. He believed in indirect rule, meaning local chiefs would govern their people under British control, Lugard was appointed governor of both northern and southern Nigeria, and he led the efforts to combine these regions into one single colony. But why did the Britain want this? So here's the simple truth. It wasn't about uniting people, it was about making administration cheaper and more profitable. Northern Nigeria was running on a budget deficit. It cost more money to run than it's made. So they are incurring many losses in the north. And the southern Nigeria, on the other hand, had access to coastal ports and profitable trade routes. It had more income than the north. So Britain decided to match them, hoping the South's money would cover the North's expenses. Lugard made the case to London, and on January 1st, 1914, Nigeria officially became one colony under British rule. At that time, the people living in Nigeria had no say, There were no town hall meetings, no votes, no public debate. The British did it quietly, efficiently, and completely. Now here's something interesting. The name Nigeria was actually suggested by Flora Shaw, who later became Lord Lugard's wife. She was a journalist writing for the newspaper, The Times in London, and thought the name should be simple and based on the River Niger. The new Nigeria colony had one governor general, Lord Lugard himself. Two separate administrations, North and South. North and South still ran differently. And number 3, a single railway system and unified budget. But even though Nigeria was now one country on paper, the divisions were still very deep. The north was mostly Islamic and followed traditional rule. The south had more Western influence, Christianity, and urban development. This raised questions. How can one country function when its people have such different beliefs, lifestyle, and governance? Many Nigerian historians argue that the amalgamation was never meant to build unity. It was meant to serve Britain's interest, and that laid the foundation for future conflicts. So after Lord Lugard signed off the amalgamation in 1914, Nigeria was officially one colony. But how did the people of Nigeria respond? Did they welcome the change? Or did they even understand what it meant? The truth is, most Nigerians had no idea what had happened there because there was no public announcement, no community input, and no translation into local languages. The British made the decision in London, and the average citizen continued life as usual. Like farming, trading, and practicing their cultures. But among the educated elites, reactions were more critical, as in the south, especially places like Lagos and Calabar, educated Nigerians began to question the arrangement. Writers, journalists, and community leaders started voicing concerns through newspapers and public speeches. They felt the British had forced together very different groups without consent, and the new government structure did not represent the people. Also, policies from the Colonial Office favored British interest over local needs. These thinkers started asking, can a country survive if the people have no shared history, culture, or agreement? But in the north, many traditional rulers were left in place under the indirect rule system because Lugard relied on emirs to control their regions. This made the northern elite more comfortable with British administration, but ordinary citizens still lived under strict colonial policies. The north had fewer schools, limited Western education, and strong religious leadership, so political awareness grew slower compared to the south. Meanwhile, Nigerian students studying abroad at that time, especially in London, were also reacting. They were exposed to European ideas about nationalism and independence, so many began writing articles calling for self-rule and unity built by Nigerians and not imposed by the British. And among all these were Abat Macaulay, aka father of Nigerian nationalism. He used his writing and activism to criticize British rule and call for Nigerian rights. By the 1920s and 30s, Macaulay and others helped form political groups to represent Nigerian interests. These early movements laid the foundation for future activism. They weren't just angry. All they wanted was a better Nigeria. So, in this, so the key reactions to amalgamation were: 1. Confusion among ordinary Nigerians. 2. Resistance from southern intellectuals and journalists. And 3. Silence or slow response from northern communities. 4. Inspiration for political activism among Nigerian students and thinkers. So many historians argue that the 1914 amalgamation planted seeds of division that still affect Nigeria today. The country was created without a shared vision, and regions were encouraged to see each other as rivals and not partners. This also gave birth to something powerful, the idea that Nigerians could challenge colonial rule and dream of a country that truly belonged to them. By the early 20th century, Nigeria was under full British control, but the seeds of change were already growing. The amalgamation brought frustration, especially in the south, and as the years passed, educated Nigerians began to demand something new, which is freedom. The rise of newspapers and public debates became a major tool to spreading nationalist ideas. Voices like Abat Macaulay, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and later Obafemi Awolowo and Ahmadu Bello began to shape the movement. They used newspapers to expose colonial injustice, challenge British policies, and promote African unity. These publications were read in schools, cafes, homes, and markets. They sparked conversations and gave ordinary Nigerians a way to understand what was really happening. Political parties emerged. In the 1930s and 40s, Nigerians began forming political organizations like the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP, that was founded by Abat Macaulay, and the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, led by Nnamdi Azikiwe, and the Action Group, AG, led by Obafemi Awolowo, also the Northern People's Congress, NPC, led by Ahmadu Bello. Each party represented different regions and ethnic interests, but they all had one thing in common. They wanted Nigeria to govern itself. That is, they want freedom at all cost. So education fueled the movement. Schools became places where young Nigerians learned not just English, maths, and science, but ideas of freedom, democracy, and justice. So many leaders studied abroad and brought back knowledge about how other nations won their independence. as workers across Nigeria started organizing against unfair wages, working conditions, and taxes. Railway workers, teachers, civil servants, they all joined in. These strikes showed the British that Nigerians were ready to fight for change and govern itself. While nationalism grew, the differences between regions became clearer. In the north, traditional, religious, slower pace of political change. And in the southwest, that is politically active with strong leadership and mobilization. And in the southeast, intellectual and media-driven activism was at a great speed. So British policies often encouraged this division using separate education systems, different tax structures, and unequal development plans. Some say it was a way to prevent Nigeria from becoming united in its struggle, And despite these challenges, Nigerian voices grew louder. By the 1950s, constitutional changes were introduced. The British began allowing Nigerians to take part in government, starting with regional assemblies and federal elections. In 1954, Nigeria became a federation of 3 regions: Northern, Western, and Eastern Nigeria. Each had its own government. This was the British way of saying, we will give you power slowly, But Nigerians were ready for more, as at that time. It was the year 1960, and after decades of struggle, sacrifice, and negotiation, Nigeria was on the brink of something historic: independence from the British rule. So let's rewind for a moment. Throughout the 1950s, Nigerian leaders from different regions held constitutional conferences with British officials. These meetings happened both in Nigeria and London, focusing on how to hand over power. The demand was clear: Nigeria wanted to rule themselves. The question wasn't if independence would come, and when and how Nigeria would be governed after the British left. And the leaders who played key roles in Nigeria's independence were Nnamdi Azikiwe, the voice of Eastern Nigeria and the passionate nationalist, and another one is Baba Obafemi Awolowo, a visionary from the West known for its bold plans, and from the North, Ahmadu Bello, a respected northern leader who valued tradition and unity, and also Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, a teacher turned politician who became Nigeria's first prime minister. And despite their differences, these leaders worked together to shape a united Nigeria. They negotiated systems of governance, elections, and political structures. Then came the big moment, On October 1st, 1960, Nigeria became an independent nation. The British flag was lowered, and the green and white Nigerian flag was raised for the first time. The streets of Lagos and cities across Nigeria were filled with celebration, music, dancing, ceremonies, and the feeling of pride. People wore traditional outfits, waved flags, and rejoiced in the birth of a free country. And the symbolism of the flag: green represents Nigeria's rich land and agriculture. The white stands for peace and unity, And the national anthem echoed across the land, a promise of hope, pride, and unity. Nnamdi Azikiwe became Nigeria's first president, and Tafawa Balewa was the first prime minister. It was a peaceful transition: no war, no bloodshed, just a hopeful beginning. But independence also came with big questions. 1. Could this new nation truly unite its people? 2. Would old regional divisions cause problems? 3. What should be done about the ethnic tensions and power struggles? So Nigeria entered independence with 1. A strong federal government, 2. Regional autonomy for the north, west, and the east. And number 3, diverse languages, religions, and tradition. So that diversity was beautiful, but it was also challenging. So many historians believe Nigeria's forced unity created mistrust between regions, and British divide and rule tactics left behind deep wounds. Also, national identity was still fragile, and tribal loyalties remained strong. But through it all, Nigeria kept growing. Its people kept pushing forward, and the spirit of independence never faded. Today, when Nigerians celebrate Independence Day, they remember the joy of October 1st, 1960, but reflect on the lessons from history. We've traveled from pre-colonial kingdoms through British conquest, down the path of resistance, and into the bright yet complicated light of independence. But the story of Nigeria doesn't end there. It doesn't end there at all. It continues every day in the lives of over 200 million people, each shaped by a history that began in 1914 with an administrative decision called the Amalgamation, So what does this really mean today? The Amalgamation was never about unity. It wasn't driven by a shared vision or national agreement. It was a colonial shortcut, an economic move that merged cultures, languages, and religions under one government. And yet, from that mix, a nation was born. A nation that has survived a civil war, a nation that has endured military rule and coups, a nation that has built democratic systems, a nation that produced global icons in music, film, and literature, and science, and so on and so forth. A nation that has remained resilient in the face of poverty, corruption, and conflict. But the legacy of division lingers. Even now, discussions about restructuring, decentralization, and regional autonomy echo in public debates. Nigeria's diversity is often its greatest challenge. Each tension, religious conflict, and uneven development remain key issues. So the question many still ask is, was amalgamation a mistake or a foundation for greatness? And here's one way to look at it. Nigeria wasn't born by its own hands. It was created by outsiders. But every generation since has worked to give it meaning. That transformation from imposed identity to choosing purpose is the real journey of Nigeria. So today, a new generation is rewriting the story. Young Nigerians are leading startups, shaping global culture through music and fashion, demanding accountability from leaders, advocating for human rights and inclusion, and building unity through digital platforms, cross-cultural collaboration. So this is the part of the story that no British governor could have predicted, that the people would take an artificial merger and build something and powerful from it. So how do we heal the wounds of the past? Can Nigeria be restructured to reflect fairness and regional government? That's a question we are asking them. And what kinds of leadership will move Nigeria forward? Not just economically, but socially and emotionally. These aren't easy questions anyway, but they are necessary. The amalgamation of Nigeria wasn't a perfect beginning. It came with confusion, conflict, and colonial control. But from that moment, Nigerians began to shape their own destiny, fighting for identity, freedom, and unity. And now, over 100 years later, that fight is still active in classrooms, parliament halls, marketplaces, and online spaces. Nigeria may not have chosen how it began, but it can choose where it goes next. So let that choice be bold, let it be united, and let it honor the voices, past and present, that never stop believing in the idea of a better Nigeria. So thanks for coming along and thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story moved you. And until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep dreaming. See you in the next video.